We have to stop emissions. We have to accelerate and improve and maximize the potential of our natural ecosystems. And when we create that balance of stopping emissions and stopping the sources of global warming and enhancing our natural systems to do what they do best, which is have a natural carbon cycle, we can actually stop and reverse global warming. That's the point. That's the premise here.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Climate Confident Podcast. My name is Tom Raftery, and with me on the show today, I have my special guest, Chad. Chad, welcome to the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, Tom. Thanks so much for having me on today. My name is Chad Frischmann. I work at the intersection of climate sustainability and regenerative systems transformation. I was the co-creator of an organization called Project Drawdown, which mapped, measured, and modeled all the technologies and practices that exist in the world today that can stop and begin to reverse global warming. And since then, I've started a couple new organizations, Regenerative Intelligence, which is an education and advisory company, and the Global Solutions Alliance, which is a nonprofit creating a new knowledge system for a regenerative future.
Okay, very good. And why? As in,
Why
what
what?
got you in?
which part of which is the why in that question?
What made you wake up one morning and decide, I got to work in this space. I got to do Project Drawdown. I got to do RegenIntel. I got, what's the thinking? What's the motivation? Why?
Yeah. Well, Tom, a lot of people who encounter my work over the last 15 years, the first thing they see or they think about is Project Drawdown, of course. This has become, one of the world's leading resources on climate solutions. And behind Drawdown is a systematic scientific study looking at tens of thousands of data points. And I was the head of research there. And so everybody assumes, Chad, you've got to be a data scientist or an atmospheric physicist, like a standard climate scientist. And the reality is that I'm not, actually. I'm actually an historian of political economy, as it happens.
Obviously.
Obviously, right? The connection's right there. But a historian of political economy, language, art, and storytelling. In short, I was a historian of propaganda. Now, I was doing my PhD work and my master's work at the University of Oxford, looking at systems change and the use of art, language, and stories in how institutions form and change and systems kind of develop over time. That's not a traditional path you might think that brings you to, climate science and data assessments of all these different solutions and technologies. But I went on sabbatical. I was 4 years into my PhD at Oxford, and I went on a sabbatical. I was invited to a royal wedding in Zambia, one of the larger tribes in Zambia, right? And I said to myself, well, who could say no to a royal wedding in Zambia, right?
I've never said no to a royal wedding in Zambia.
I know. I mean, who could say no? So it's like, I'm going to do this right. And I took 2 months to backpack, not only in Zambia, but also Tanzania, Mozambique, and Malawi. Now, during that 2 months of backpacking, I met a lot of amazing people along the way, a lot of local people, a lot of indigenous peoples, local communities. I'm a fairly sociable guy, and I just really fell in love with the joy, the camaraderie, the community connection that these people had that was so different than Northern European or the United States where I was come from. But I also fell in love with the environment. I fell in love with the biodiversity, the landscape that is very rare these days in sub-Saharan Africa. There are places in India, places all over the world, but they're shrinking. And that was the point, because I also saw the degradation and destruction of that environment and of the communities that I was really falling in love with. And so this destruction and degradation was coming from the very systems I was studying the formation of from an historical context. So anyway, I flew back to Oxford. 5 days after landing, I put my PhD on suspension. I quit my full-time job, and I flew to Berkeley, California. And at that moment, I decided to dedicate my life and my career to looking at that intersection between indigenous peoples' rights and well-being, environmental conservation, and sustainable development. Well, Tom, as you probably guess, and maybe a lot of your listeners might know this, these are the frontline issues in a changing climate. Our biodiversity, our non-human species and environments, the indigenous peoples and local communities, And the world's population is experiencing the most poverties and inequities in the world. They are already experiencing climate change. They're experiencing it today, and they're going to experience it far worse in the years to come than we can even imagine.
Mm-hmm.
So very quickly working in that space, I started to work on climate mitigation, adaptation strategies, weaving conservation and indigenous rights and well-being and how do we improve people's livelihoods into how we approach climate. And that actually was what drew me to create Project Drawdown with Paul Hawken and Amanda Ravenhill to map, measure, model all the solutions that can stop and reverse global warming.
Fascinating. Fascinating. And so looking at the current climate conversations, where do you see them falling short?
Current climate conversations are falling short, particularly in, let's just be straightforward, in the last 9 months. These climate conversations are falling short because it's become almost a dirty word. We fought very long, for decades, we've been fighting to have climate change as part of the discourse. And actually, let's take a step back here, because of course, we have to understand that climate change is a response of Earth systems to something that we are actually doing, which is global warming, which we're increasing greenhouse gas emissions through all sorts of reasons. And that causes global warming. And so climate change is a response to that, right? So the climate discourse is kind of forgetting this really fundamental fact, which is we have to stop emissions. We have to accelerate and improve and maximize the potential of our natural ecosystems. And we create that, when we create that balance of stopping emissions and stopping the sources of global warming and enhancing our natural systems to do what they do best, which is have a natural carbon cycle, we can actually stop and reverse global warming. That's the point. That's the premise here. So we're kind of missing, I think, the point here in the climate discourse is what do we actually need to do? What are the actions, the ways we can be implementing those actions that can have a tangible result in the physical world? And then have all of these other cascading benefits to human well-being and our non-human well-being, human and non-human well-being, right? So I think that's kind of been missing in the dialogue a lot. And then, of course, as I said, we've fought long to even get that concept into the vernacular of everyday discourse and society across the finance sector, business sector, policy sector, community sectors, all across the board. And now, with the new political economic systems that are taking shape in parts of the world, particularly in the United States with the Trump administration and others across the world, what we're seeing is that all of that hard work is coming into question as the very words and the language that we've been using are coming into questions, I said, and becoming almost a dirty word. I'm seeing it left and right across all those areas, all those sectors that have made such headway. They're starting to pull back, and I think that's a real danger.
How do we reverse that?
Well, I think there's a couple things. First of all, getting the language right, like going back to the point is what are the actions? What are the things that we could do? What are the technologies, the practices, the behavior changes that we need that can solve not only for climate? That's an important point is like when I designed the drawdown solutions framework and looking at all these different technologies, the point of them is that you can't do any one of them independently. You have to do them all as part of a system of solutions. And the catch here, and this is the work I do now with Regenerative Intelligence and the Global Solutions Alliance, is that system of solutions can not only solve for the climate crisis that we're in, the reducing, mitigating, and eventually reversing global warming. It does that, but it also helps protect and preserve biodiversity. It improves human health and well-being. It improves livelihoods across the board. Across the board, it provides a more just, equitable, and resilient economy and society for today and in the short, medium, and long term. These are just win-win-win-win-win-win solutions, right? And I think that's the point is, how do we change this? How do we change this as you described? I mean, talk about other things. I mean, what we try to teach at RegenIntel is it's like a prism. It's like when you look at its prism, each part of the lens through which you look at the same sets of solutions, again, the different technologies, practices, and behavior changes and mindset shifts can have tangible results on whatever issue area matters to you. So if we're talking about disaster preparedness and disaster relief, disaster recovery, same sets of solutions that can actually, if we do that right, can also reduce emissions. If we're talking about how do we preserve and protect our precious biodiversity and non-human species, those are the same sets of solutions. If we talk about avoiding refugee crisis or improve child well-being, health and well-being, same sets of solutions. If we're talking about if rights, so human rights are part of the lens with which we need to look, those are the solutions. But you know what? If we want to talk about just pure ROI, long-term ROI, return on investment,
Mm-hmm.
right? We did the math here. That system of solutions that solves for all these cascading problems, all these cascading challenges, that system of solutions has a approximately 190 to $120 trillion return on that investment over a 30-year period. Like, I mean, I call it the duh factor. Like, duh. Like, anybody who's looking at that, whatever lens you want to do, if you want to look at it from a financial lens, these are the right sets of solutions. And that's even if you're not considering the risk component, right? The short, medium, and long-term risk to your business, risk to your financial portfolio, risk to your constituencies and your communities of which you are reliant upon as a policymaker. If you don't even include those risks and you just look at the basic economics, it's a no-brainer. Add in those risk factors and it's like, well, why aren't we doing it?
Why aren't we doing it?
Entrenched interests, right? We have to be reasonable. We have a very small group of extremely wealthy individuals at the helms of a very small collection of very powerful, wealthy corporations that want to continue business as usual because they're making extreme profit and they understand that. And they have a mindset that looks in short-term gains. What's going to happen in the next quarter? What's going to happen in year two? They're not thinking about even 3 to 4 years into the future. They're not thinking about 10 years in the future. They're certainly not thinking about the small group of extremely wealthy, powerful individuals and corporations. They're not thinking about where is my company in 30 years from now? What is my company? What does that business look like 50 years from now? What's it doing? Is it thriving? If it's a family-owned business, for example, Tom, what are my children and grandchildren leading in 50 years from now? Where's the legacy I'm leaving? They're not thinking about that, and a small group of them are not doing this. So I think that's where we're seeing the biggest barriers to implementing these solutions that could really be transformative to the economy, to our society, and to our environments.
Right. And I mean, you talk about how emissions reduction isn't the only thing we need to do. And here on this podcast, I say that the podcast is about highlighting successful emissions reduction stories and strategies. So I'm missing a trick, right?
Oh no, I think so mitigating emissions, which means I actually not even like the word mitigate. I think it means to lessen, and I think we just need to eliminate emissions. And we there's always going to be maybe some, and that's just the reality of life. In fact, when you breathe, you're breathing in oxygen, and you're exhaling carbon dioxide. I mean, there's a natural things that are going to happen, of course, but we can get that to within our industries, within our sectors, we can get that down to almost zero. And when you balance that out with ecological restoration, protection and restoration of our land and our marine and water systems, our natural ecosystems have a process called photosynthesis. A magic and a miracle of photosynthesis, converting carbon dioxide and in some cases methane to soil organic carbon, to biomass, to store that safely. And we have that technology because it's been around for hundreds of millions of years. That's basic. So we need to reduce those emissions, sure, but we also need to maximize the potential of our ecosystems. Now, part of the challenge, Dom, is when you degrade ecosystems, when you destroy and degrade our marine and terrestrial environments, you're releasing carbon from the atmosphere. All that stored carbon gets released in the atmosphere. So the challenge what we're facing right now is that we're still emitting a lot of greenhouse gases across the board, and we are degrading our environment at record pace. So we're reducing the capacity of our natural systems to actually mitigate that problem. Now, beyond just the mitigation sequestration lens, these solutions have what we call RegenIntel cascading benefits. not just co-benefits. Like, so we also did a mapping. We looked at all the solutions for drawdown solutions that can stop global warming, and we mapped them to achieve all of the sustainable development goals. So my team and I did a research, we did analysis, and basically through indirect or direct or indirect means, nearly every technology, every practice has co-benefits that allow us to achieve all of the SDGs.
Right.
Like, wow, right? So these are co-benefits. This is when you think about solar energy, right? If you think about solar energy solely, solar photovoltaics solely as a technology about reducing emissions, you're missing a huge part of the picture. This is creating a resilient, distributed energy system that allows us to deal with shocks in our system, right? By having a diversified and renewable source of energy. It allows for extension or electrification in areas that currently don't have access to it, so it improves livelihoods. And it's also a much healthier option, right? We all know about coal, oil, and gas producing noxious fumes that are detrimental to our human health. And if we start thinking about the 800 million people on the planet that don't have access to electricity today and are using kerosene lamps for cooking and for lighting, and just imagine replacing that with solar, you're improving health outcomes for millions and hundreds of millions of people. And at the same time, you know what you also do, Tom? You improve educational outcomes.
Mm.
Because students who are studying with kerosene lamps and having health problems, which is seen all over the world, suddenly don't have those health problems. And you know what? They do better in school and they have better lives overall. So this is what we mean by all of these co-benefits. And then when
Sure.
you start mapping them, Tom, to systems, thinking about systems of solutions and how the benefits of the system, you see what we call cascading benefits. These are feedback loops, virtuous feedback loops that create greater abundance across social, financial, ecological capital, the many different forms of capital. They start to expand when you start looking at these solutions as part of systems with cascading benefits that enhance and reinforce each other and create more abundance without extracting and exploiting. So that's what I really want to hone in on for your listeners, thinking about climate as an opportunity, right? Thinking about how we solve the climate crisis by stopping global and reversing global warming, but then see that as an opportunity to design a better future for all, a better future for all our fellow humans and all our non-human kin.
And just picking up a tiny little point there from that as well. I mean, the addition of solar to families who are using kerosene also reduces their spend on kerosene de facto, which gives them more disposable income for other things. So it increases the economic benefits to them and their community as well, right?
Precisely. Absolutely. Absolutely. Tom, I want to ask you, like, if you think about solar, do you think solar is the one and only answer to a renewable energy future?
Of course not.
What other things have we got?
I mean, there's wind as well, obviously. There's batteries. So those three together are a huge, huge lever, not just in the developed world, but also in the developing world, because it gives access to microgrids, for example, for communities, and
Got it.
allows them massive economic development, which wouldn't have been possible in the absence of energy before.
Got it. Right on point. Right. Precisely that, Tom. I mean, because a lot of folks will say solar, 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 and then you get the critics say, oh, well, we can't just have it all be solar because the sun doesn't shine all the time. And you get these silly
Mm.
things. We just recently there was a debate amongst gubernatorial debate in New Jersey where the two New Jersey candidates, Democrat and Republicans, said, we can't do it. We can't just focus on solar because the sun doesn't shine all the time. Well, look, that's why no one's saying that. We gotta focus on a diversified portfolio of energy sources: wind,
Mm.
solar, geothermal, perennial biomass. So how do we grow the right kind of biomass and process that biomass, creating renewable economies of life? That's what I like to call it, renewable economies of life. So how do we do that in a diversified portfolio? That creates such resilience, right? That in and of itself is whether the sun isn't shining, the wind is blowing. If neither are there, you've got geothermal. If you don't have that at that time or place, you've got biomass. And these are all microeconomies that reinforce each other, that create resilience, independence, and thriving livelihoods. I mean,
Mm.
these are the cascading benefits we talk about.
Yeah. Tidal is another one, but the other one as well that people don't mention enough, I think, is the grid, because it's not true to say the sun doesn't always shine or the wind doesn't always blow, because yes, the sun does always shine, because if the sun stopped shining tomorrow, we'd all be dead. So yes, the sun is always shining, maybe not where you are at that moment in time, but you do interconnections to places where the sun is shining, and that way you get solar energy from your next door neighbor. You know, if you've cloud over your solar farm, your next door neighbor might not have, and so on and so on, and you grow that out and you make massive super grids. I mean, in China, they have huge gigawatt scale solar farms in the desert, and they transport that energy to the coastal cities 4,500 kilometers over HVDC, UHVDC lines, ultra high voltage DC lines with minimal losses. And you look at that and you say, why isn't everybody doing that? For God's sake.
There's so, Tom, I feel like there are so many duh factors, that reference that. Like, there's like, I used to go on stages all the time, and I used to do this thing where I'd be like, so these are win, 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 win. It's like, we got to get people start to have these mindset shifts when they go, uh-huh, 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 uh-huh. And by the fifth or sixth, oh yeah, it becomes duh, like we should be doing this. We need a lot more of that in our education and in our communication about what these are. It's not just do this and you will reduce emissions. It's getting all of those factors till you get the switch that happens and makes a duh. Like, why aren't we looking at smart grids? Why aren't we looking at, right now my mind is slipping about the exact percentage, but we lose 30-40% of all energy just in distribution before it even gets to when we turn on our lights. Just imagine that loss. And the thing is, we know we can be more efficient with it. We have better technology. One of the benefits of AI, one really good benefit of AI, is that it allows us to have smarter grids that can move things around. So the combination of technology that reduces that distribution losses with a smart grid technology that allows us to create those super grids. I mean, this is the future. This has been written about in science fiction novels for decades, and yet some few people are making a lot of money in infrastructure that they've invested in over a long period of time. They won't get out of it because they're just going to make as much money as they can before they have to. And that's what I want to maybe want to also talk a little bit about is there's going to be a time, Tom, when we just can't continue to do it.
Yeah. Before we get there,
yeah,
you were talking a while ago about solutions plural, but we really only mentioned the solar as being one of the solutions. What are some of the others?
Oh my goodness. Well, I mean, there's tons of solutions. I mean, my team and I mapped and measured, modeled about 100 or 90 plus solutions across every area of human activity. So, I mean, we can talk about anything you'd like. One of the most important sectors that I think often gets missed out is that natural or ecosystem-based solutions. And that is inclusive of not only how we manage our land and marine systems, but also our food. How we produce food, what we're producing, and then ultimately how we look at the supply chain, getting it from production all the way to our mouths. And then at the end of the day, because so much gets wasted throughout that system, how it gets disposed of. So I always like to talk about the food system because it's also really, Tom, it's like a microcosm, or it's like a nice lens that looks at every part of the system. You could do a systemic look at every sector. And the food system is so interesting because it touches upon every sector, as does almost every other sector. And that's one of the beautiful things that we teach through regenerative intelligence in our education programs is how to see how each sector is actually an interconnected system of systems, and they all intersect with each other. But let's take food as an example.
Well, food's a great example because we all have to eat. So it's something massively relatable.
Yeah, absolutely. Like hopefully 3 times a day, people get to eat, right?
Yeah.
And we all do it. And you know what? When you eat, Tom, What do you experience when you eat?
Well, good question. Mostly joy because I tend to eat with company. So for me, eating isn't just functional, it's also social.
Tom, it's like we're in some kind of mind meld right now. Joy, joy is one of my favorite words. It really is, and it's one of our core values because I think when we really break it down, humanity down, we exist for two reasons. We experience existence in two reasons, two ways: to survive and to find joy.
Mm.
These are the two things. How do we survive in the world that we live in? And then how do we find some joy in that? And that joy factor is getting used and abused by our exploitative, extractive, capitalist, corporate capitalist system that markets and advertises the extreme, excessive joy. But at the
Mhm.
core, it's how we experience joy. So when you say like food experiences joy, that is it. We experience joy when we consume food. And I couldn't have couldn't have planted that word better from you. Thank you. Because it's so important, because that's why it's so relatable. But then we start to look at the system and we think about like you, I don't know about you, Tom, but me, I love taking a piece of bread and dipping it in some olive oil. I mean, so good, right?
Yeah,
It's like there's
yeah.
some, or like that butter. Oof. I just love it. I love it. Now, if we think about that crust of bread, we think about drop of oil that we're
Mhm.
consuming, taking so much joy in, and we trace that back. We trace that to the olive trees and the orchards that are producing the olives, and the wheat and that gets converted into, that gets processed into flour and so on. If we take that from the beginning, how we produce those crops matters. And we
Yeah.
can do that with regenerative agriculture, multi-strata agroforestry. We can produce that butter if we want with a silvopasture. These are all just three solutions, just so, and there's a host of other agricultural solutions that are regenerative. But it matters how you do it, how you implement those, how you do it, right? To create greater productive, more productive soil, reduce pesticides and fertilizer use, et cetera, et cetera. Right there is a whole host of solutions in how we're producing that material, the input that goes into that bread and then olive oil. Well, then we have to process it. We have to harvest it and we have to process it. So again, we go through a processing stage that converts that to flour and ultimately bakes the bread and
Mm.
presses the olives and makes the olive oil. But then what do we do next? We have factories all over the world that are churning out emissions to produce cardboard, tin, glass, plastics to put that food in. And then what do? We put that onto trucks, trains, boats, and sadly, planes to fly luxury commodities all over the world in refrigerated containers using hydrofluorocarbons, which is hundreds to thousands times more potent to greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. And we ship them all over the world, spewing out long dead fossilized phytoplankton to move this food all around the world. Because remember, that's what it is, really,
Mhm.
fossilized phytoplankton that we're burning and exerting, putting in the atmosphere. And then we put them into grocery stores where they overstocked due to the advertising marketing industry's desire to create the sense of abundance for their consumers. So they get overstocked, but only the perfect food that
Mm.
looks really good, because we can't do the imperfect stuff because somehow the advertising world tells us we don't want that. But then we overconsume because also, a lot of those grocery stores oversell, so they give you big giant bags of things and whatever. So you overstock, and we consumers we take we take 30% of what we purchase at the store we waste. So it's like taking it's like driving home with 3 bags of groceries, and then you go home and you take one of those bags and you throw it in the bin. Paper,
Mm.
tin, plastic, all. You just throw it into the bin and say bye. And then we have trucks pick up that garbage and put it into a landfill where it emits methane. Now, so that was just a little story of the food system, but regenerative agriculture, tons of solutions that we have there, how to manage our food production far better ways that reduce emissions, create better livelihoods, healthier soils, increase biodiversity, help reduce the decimation of our bees and pollinators around the world. Tons. We have tons of solutions in how we process our food. We have solutions in how we package our food using different types of materials that are grown instead of produced through synthetic means, and that are done in more responsible and even, in fact, regenerative ways, regeneratively producing biomaterials that could be used for packaging. There's so many examples that I could list a bunch of them, but then we keep going on down the line, and how we change our refrigerated containers to move away from hydrofluorocarbons to more natural alternatives. There are solutions there. There are solutions in how we transport our food, right? You're getting my point, right? And there's solutions, of course, to across the board, from all the way to the point where consumers just buy less. They buy what they're going to consume, and that's it. So I see these as like a host of amazing opportunities. If I'm an advertiser, marketer, there are ways I can actually change the culture around food consumption. If I'm managing the waste of a city or a municipality, I can figure out alternative ways to recycle, reuse, to compost, to even, as a last resort, landfill methane capture or waste to energy as a very, very, very last resort. If I'm in packaging, tons of solutions. So across the board, there are so many, and each one of those are opportunities for a business, opportunities for innovation, opportunities for investment, and they're opportunities to create a future we actually bloody want.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Yeah. And you talk about regenerative agriculture, but you also talk about regenerative lots of other things as well. That I've had lots of episodes on this podcast talking about regenerative agriculture, but not about other regenerative things. So talk to me about the expanded definition of regenerative.
Well, that's a great question, Tom, because regenerative regenerative systems is what we like to call it. Regenerative economies, regenerative systems. Regenerative is a lens. At the core of it is, how do we create systems that have placed life at the center of our decision making? So how do we emulate our natural systems in which we are actually part of, right? So we are ourselves a regenerative system. Your body is a regenerative system. The environments and the ecologies that we live in are regenerative systems. This is our natural world. But how do we take our human systems and mirror that, so that at the core end goal, we're creating a system that regenerates life, right? That continues to create ensuring that life, the conditions for life to thrive in its fullest capacity are in place. So regenerative agriculture is an important thing, because at the core of what regenerative agriculture means, how to produce food in ways that ensure life thrives in abundance. That's what its core regenerative agriculture is all about. Now, regenerative energy systems. How do we create and design diversified energy portfolios that place life at the center of that, right? How do we ensure that we reduce the exploitation and extraction, the degradation of our natural systems and our bodies? So our human, our actual exploitation of people, but get that to end that exploitation and create a regenerative system where our bodies, our lives are thriving, our environments are thriving, other species are thriving. So designing those renewable energy systems that we just talked about earlier, it becomes a regenerative system when we are creating energy systems that don't decimate our pollinators, that don't destroy the health and livelihood of our outcomes of our most marginalized populations in both low-income countries, or what we might want to call the global majority of places, because we got to remember the global majority, but even in the global minority, even in places like the United States, and part of their neighborhoods in Los Angeles that themselves are experiencing a degradation of human health outcomes from energy systems just around the corner. So when I talk about regenerative energy systems, I'm talking about energy systems that allow life to thrive. And I'm about, regenerative built environment. So how do we create buildings that are living, that are contributing to the well-being and the welfare of our human bodies and our non-human kin? Transportation systems, even our human education and health systems. And health somehow feels like logical, right? Because regenerative healthcare, that's actually a thing that often is associated with longevity thing. But I work with a lot of health professionals, doctors, former health policymakers who aren't focused on the longevity side, but regenerative health for them means how do we create institutions and systems within healthcare that ensure that we are preventing disease as opposed to treating disease. And that prevention of disease is seen as regenerative because we're actually regenerating not necessarily a limb or something like this, but we're regenerating our well-being. Right, we're allowing that to have systems. We're generating the system itself, the institutions themselves. So when I think about regeneration or regenerative systems, I think far beyond just planting trees, which is important, particularly making sure you do the right species in the right place and the right time. Really, really important. But also, in agriculture and regenerative ocean systems, these are all sort of our natural systems that make a lot of sense. But we need to look across the board, all areas of human activity, and place that regenerative lens on them. And let's maximize the cascading benefits that create these virtuous regenerative cycles of abundance, well-being, and justice.
And are you seeing any signs of this shift already from policymakers or markets or anything at all?
First of all, Tom, regenerative as a concept, regeneration as a concept, has a very long legacy. We're talking about Buckminster Fuller, Bucky Fuller.
Yep.
We're talking about Donella Meadows. We're talking about Carol Sanford, a whole host of thinkers and doers spending decades who've been talking about regenerative systems, either using that term or around or adjacent vernacular that has evolved over time. So this isn't something new, right? I mean, Janine Benyus, biomimicry. There's so many, John Fullerton, regenerative economics. This is a long lineage of folks who've been working in this space, and we're part of it. So what I want to say there is this concept of life-affirming systems has influence in many of, in sustainability, for example. If you unpack Donella Meadows' systems approach to an understanding of sustainability, it is essentially a regenerative system that she's talking about, right? So it really has had a lot of influence across the board in a lot of the movements that have taken shape. Now, that being said, how much of our system is actually regenerative in the way we're defining it? Well, how much of it is actually sustainable? How much of it is actually climate solutions? We're talking about a tiny fraction. Very, very small percentage of the system is actually operating in that way. And that's because of the wealth, power, and prestige of the people and organizations that are existing in that extractive, exploitative system. Now, but what I'm seeing here is a system in its death throes. Right? I'm seeing a world in which our Earth systems are slapping our human systems right in the face. And it's already been happening. It's going to get much worse. I call these the great catastrophes.
Right.
And I'm not a doomer. I'm not a gloomer, right? I'm the optimist guy. I'm the solutions guy. I really think that we've got it and we can do it. But I'm not disillusioned. I'm not an ostrich putting my head in the sand. I want to be grounded in reality and then build towards that future. Now, we have already emitted so much. We've already destroyed so much of our natural ecosystems. We've already disrupted our hydrological cycles to such an extent that even if we switched everything overnight, we'd still have built-in tipping points, built-in catastrophes already in the system, which is why I often say, Tom, the idea of incorporating climate risk is ridiculous. There's no such thing as climate risk. There's just climate reality. We should not be feeling the risk of these significant catastrophes in various natural and human sectors and systems. It's already built in. We need to lessen that and eventually get through it and thrive. I call it thriving through the catastrophes. How do we thrive through this? And I think we can do that. And that means building up the capacity of these regenerative systems, regenerative companies, regenerative portfolios, financial portfolios, regenerative communities, regenerative systems, the models all over the world. If we can get to 20, 30%, I think we have the capacity to thrive through the built-in catastrophes that are looming. again, I don't want to scare people because I'm not a doomer.
Hmm.
I'm not saying about the end of civilization and humans are off going to be extinct from the planet. I mean, Bill Gates recently said, much to my regret, he discounted climate and said focus on human health and well-being. And I think it's ridiculous that he said that. The
Hmm.
one thing he got right is that climate change isn't going to wipe out humanity, but it's going to cause an unprecedented level of destruction, death, impoverishment. That sense of joy that you experienced that we talked about earlier was going to be diminished for billions of people so greatly
Hmm.
if we don't make these changes. So I guess my point in saying here is a long-winded way of saying we're not there yet. We have the potential because there's regenerative companies and initiatives and systems popping up all over the world. We need to accelerate that. We need to invest in that and see ourselves as a society, a system of societies, because there's many different societies, but see all these societies operating in 50 years from now and thriving. Imagine that, and then we build towards it. And I think that's really the key here. Is we gotta have architects and designers and business leaders who want to see their company, their investment portfolio, their community thriving 50 years from now based on the reality of what's right in front of us, which is Earth systems slapping the human systems right in the face.
Fair. Okay. For people who are listening who want to act on regeneration, where should they begin?
I'm going to do a little bit of a self plug there because I think it's what I dedicate my life to. So, Regenerative Intelligence is an education company.
Hmm.
And we think ourselves as an education company not only to educate and train and upskill individuals to be current and future leaders of that next economy that we've just talked about. Like, how do we do that today? But we also advise companies, funds, and communities on how to plan and strategize for that future, how to become that company 30 years from now that's thriving and a leader of the economy, not a laggard who's struggling, right? So how do we do that? So RegenIntel offers that, and we see this as education, right? We see this as training, we see the skill building. So go to www.regenintel.earth and learn about our education platform, which has been described as the only master's course on regeneration in the world today. We have trained over 180 fellows and leaders from around the world, all of them launching amazing projects in the world that are regenerative projects. So the more we come through that program, the more projects that we can unleash into the world and get to the point where we can thrive through what's in front of us.
Lovely. Lovely. Left field question. If you could have any person or character, alive or dead, real or fictional, as a champion for a regenerative future, who would it be and why?
Wow, Tom, that's a question I've never been asked or thought of. If a real or fiction who could be a champion of a regenerative future and why? Well, I got it. So in my mind, it's very clear we need to have Gandalf.
Brilliant.
We have Gandalf, because Gandalf, he represents in Tolkien's world of the Lord of the Rings. For those who don't know that, Gandalf represents an entity, a being that helps guide and steward the end and destruction of an extractive, exploitative system to enhance and strengthen one that is better for all life. And he has one really important principle. I actually adopt this. It's really funny you bring this up because now that I think about it, I just wrote a piece on this because it's something I call the Sauron principle. Now, for those again who don't know Lord of the Rings, Sauron is the antagonist in the Lord of the Rings story. He's the architect of all that is evil and exploitative and extractive in the world. But he creates these rings of power, and there's one ring to rule them all. And the whole
Hmm.
point of the entire set of novels is that this one Sauron is trying to get this one ring to rule over all of the world. And I think what Gandalf does is he leads this fellowship of the ring to destroy that one ring so that we could not have one ring to rule them all. Now, I actually use this analogy, Tom, all the time when I talk about regenerative systems. All the time. I just wrote a piece on it.
Nice.
And where I say, the anti-Sauron principle. We need to build our systems to be interoperable, collaborative, working collectively and in constructive overlap instead of competition, and instead of trying to get to be the one platform, the one approach, the one model, the one framework to rule them all. So the anti-Sauron principle is really fundamental to a regenerative future and regenerative economies. And that's why I would have Gandalf be our champion for a better future for all.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Chad, it's been great. If people would like to know more about yourself or any of the topics we discussed on the podcast today, where would you have me direct them?
Well, I'd say as the first go-to is, again, www.regenintel.earth. That is really the core of my work these days. We also have a nonprofit called the Global Solutions Alliance, www.gsa.earth. I also have my own podcast called Chad's Climate Quest, which, Tom, I'd like to invite you on for one of my episodes.
Fantastic. Great.
All
Brilliant.
right.
Love it. Look forward to it. Chad, that's been fascinating. Thanks a million for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you so much, Tom. It's been a pleasure. See you soon.